So this is the question, what are the issues the church is facing right now? What are issues churches have to deal with? Well, there's a lot of people talking about the issue of racism, right? That was a big thing in 2020, especially. Obviously, there was all the COVID lockdown stuff. That was a big issue. Is your church going to remain open? Are you going to just submit to whatever the government says? We will do whatever the government says. That's an issue, obviously. But then you have the whole Pride Month, LGBT, transgender surgeries for kids. That's a huge issue because there's churches. And obviously this is, if you have a local Bible-believing church, there's probably not too many people in there, hopefully none, that would support such a thing. But you get a church where there's a couple hundred people, you're going to have a few. So I think of what are the big issues. Racism, I just want to read this statement. It was sent to me several years ago. It was sort of in reaction to the Charlottesville thing. Remember the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017? A few days later, this statement was put out by area pastors. In fact, a couple of the largest, supposedly evangelical churches in Hampshire County. The pastors helped draft this statement and they sent it out to other pastors, which is how I got it. And it's the statement on racism. So based on this, these pastors really felt that racism was kind of one of, if not the big issue the church was facing, one of the big issues. Let me just read it. Statement on racism says, as evangelical Christians in churches, we categorically oppose racism. And to that, I'd say, yes, amen. The agendas of the Ku Klux Klan, white supremacists and white nationalists, the alt-right and neo-Nazis are antithetical to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I remember when I read that, I wasn't sure what the alt-right was, so I Googled it, and every article that mentioned the alt-right always mentioned something about Donald Trump, so I was assuming, since this statement was sent out a few days after the Charlottesville thing, I assumed it was a rebuke against pastors who might have voted for Trump. That's sort of how I took it. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but let me continue reading. Furthermore, we affirm that to support or encourage or to take part in these groups and their activities or to indulge in or accept personal racism has no place in the Christian life, and to stay silent in the face of such monstrous sin shows neither love for Jesus nor love for the humanity for whom he died. We attest to the equality of all races, knowing that every human being is made in the image of God. So to stay silent after the Charlottesville incident, to stay silent in the face of such a monstrous sin, it shows that you don't love Jesus. Okay, so notice it doesn't say that racism is a monstrous sin, because racism is a sin. To hate somebody because of their ethnicity is wrong. The Bible calls this partiality, and it's wrong. But notice it doesn't say that racism is a monstrous sin. It says that to stay silent is a monstrous sin. Silence is violence, I guess. And if you do stay silent, maybe you don't love Jesus. So this is actually probably the most strongly worded statement I've ever seen. Taking a hard line. But yeah, racism, to hate someone, mistreat them over their skin color, it's wrong, absolutely. But, and when I read this, and even today, I wonder if they would take a hard line, if they would say maybe the same thing about the agenda to put kids through transgender surgery. But let's continue with the article or the statement against racism. God created man in his own image. The image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. And he made from one blood every nation of mankind to live in all the face of the earth. Acts 17:26. So we stand in solidarity with all those who have fought. Okay, so this is interesting. We stand in solidarity with all those who have fought often to the last measure to overthrow racism in the modern era, the abolitionists of the Civil War, those who opposed the racism of the Nazis and Imperial Japan during the Second World War, and those who advocated for civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s, along with those who continue to work for human dignity or human equality and dignity today. So, we stand with those who fought in the Civil War. This is a bold statement where you actually have pastors now supporting warfare, where you have pastors making a statement where they affirm warfare and the use of force to fight against what they view as an evil ideology. Again, I just wonder if they would support the use of force by the government to fight against other evils. Would you support the government using force to fight against maybe transgender surgery for kids? I don't know. But it continues, we affirm that not only is all of humanity made in God's image and thus of equal value, all of humanity stands in need of God's saving grace and is the focus of his incredible love. For God so loved the world, and it quotes John 3:16. This fundamental equality of all human beings is the true understanding of human dignity and worth. Okay, so that's the statement, and then it quotes Romans 10:12. So a hardline statement against racism. And while I agree with the sentiment against racism, maybe not the silence is violence thing that they sort of hinted at, but the overall sentiment against racism, yes, racism is wrong. To be clear, racism is wrong. Every pastor I know believes racism is wrong, no question. But racism, not really a pressing issue in churches here in Massachusetts. We're not really facing that as a big issue. So to see a strongly worded statement against that, I thought was, somewhat surprising. But what is maybe the big issue of our day? Is it not the LGBT agenda and abortion? But just to focus on this one thing, LGBT compromise. This is a big issue. Of all the churches I know of that have gone bad, it's almost always started with compromise on this issue of the whole gay marriage agenda and all of that. And now it's gone to the extreme of putting little children through transgender surgery. So after reading this statement against racism, I've never forgot it, I reached out to a few of these pastors to see if they would be willing to draft a similar statement against the LGBT agenda and how that's facing the church. And a lot of churches wrote it into their church constitution that we will not perform gay weddings because churches are afraid of getting sued. So this is a pressing issue when all these churches are changing their constitution to protect against it. Big issue, definitely. So I reached out to these pastors and I said, would you be willing to draft a similar statement? And I'll do it with you. Hey, will you be willing to pass or draft a similar statement against LGBT, putting kids through transgender surgeries? One pastor responded, he told me, quote, there will be no statement. He said, it's too complicated. The LGBT issue, it's just not that clear. It's too hard. It would take like a year. So they drafted this statement on racism in about 2 days, maybe a week. But he said it would take a better part of a year to draft. LGBT, too complicated, too hard. There will be no statement. Another pastor that I reached out to, who leads probably the largest church in Western Mass, in the Northampton area, he said he didn't want to speak out against LGBTQ in a statement. He said, I'd rather handle that in my preaching. So I went to his YouTube channel to see what kind of things he's saying in his sermons. And the one thing that did come up, the one time where he did address it, he asked the question, is the Bible oppressive towards the LGBT lifestyle? Is the Bible oppressive towards transgenders? And he said, his response was, That's a really hard question and a difficult one. And that's a direct quote. Well, here's the thing. It's not a hard state. It's not a hard question. It's not a difficult question. It's not difficult at all. It's very, very clear. So why is it that they would put out a statement against racism, but absolutely we will not put out a statement against LGBT?